And hello, everybody. Welcome to the Russ Matthews Show. There is a lot going on right now that inevitably is going to impact every single Canadian in a bunch of different ways, including financially. We're going to talk about a few different things today on the show. We've got the inauguration that happened yesterday, but more interestingly, because an inauguration, okay, it's a lot of pomp, a lot of fluff. More interestingly was what happened after, which is the executive orders that were signed. Now, I've pulled a couple of these that I find most interesting personally, and or maybe you'll find them upsetting depending on how you look at things. We're going to talk about those, but I've also noticed some people that are really missing the point. People that just aren't getting what this is all about. Missing the point online when it comes to complaining about big billionaires spending in politics. We'll connect that to the inauguration, what's been going on there. I've got to talk to you about that. Now, of course, the other elephant in the room is the tariffs that could come into effect in short order here in Canada. Now, a lot has changed over the past couple of days in regards to when this could come in and how it could impact you. There's been a lot of arguments about how we can avoid it, plans to fight back, and those plans might not shock you, at all, that those plans are pretty controversial. Those plans, not everybody's on board for those plans, even though some people are seemingly going to be forced to be on board with those plans. So we're going to talk about that and how some people are misunderstanding the problem entirely. And it's been going on. You know this is happening, and it's heating up now, getting a little bit more intense with the Liberal leadership election that's going on. Finding out who is going to be the next leader of the Liberal Party, yes, but also who is going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, because by all reports, Justin Trudeau is planning on stepping down and letting this new Liberal leader be an interim Prime Minister until an election is triggered. But there are some interesting things going on here. Some good points made by some of these candidates. We've seen the candidates come out: Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, as well. I'm blanking on her name. Christina Gold, she another Liberal MP who's trying to be next Prime Minister, even if it's just on an interim basis. There are some hypocritical arguments and a bigger argument about how messed up the Canadian system is and how some people are seeing it a lot differently than others. And it might not even matter over the next while, because even though we're expecting an election, we might not actually see one, at least when we're thinking that we're going to see it. So there's a lot going on today. Let's start here. Give it a quick paper tap. Let's start here at the inauguration and the executive orders that were signed, because, like I said, that is what I think is most interesting about this. Too many to go over today. It was fast and they came quickly, like 20 different orders signed. But I found a few very interesting, and so did some Canadian politicians who commented on it. Not surprisingly, one common character, I think you're going to know who I'm referring to here as I flip over and show you exactly what these changes are going to be. Now, here we have the website where the sort of titles of these different executive orders are coming in. The first one is putting America first in international environmental agreements. This impacts Canada. This impacts Canada because we are also a member of these international environmental agreements. What this one refers to is the Paris Climate Accord, these agreements that a whole bunch of nations signed on to, saying, yes, we are taking the fight to preserve the country or the world climate. We're taking it seriously. We're signing on to this pledge. Now, this executive order is explaining how, well, actually, even though, in the words that it goes on to say here, even though we care about the environment and we've been doing a lot to sustain it, well, we don't actually want to be a part of these climate accords any longer. Now, people are outraged about this. People are outraged about that. Specifically, let me flip here, Stephen Guilbeault. This is Stephen Guilbeault, who says that it is deplorable that Trump will pull out of the Paris Agreement as California burns. Again, timing, a lot of environmental supporters, a lot of the people who are in favor of the Paris Climate Accords, well, they're saying, well, this is bad timing. We were seeing California burn to the ground. That is clearly a result of climate change. Now, some people will see things a lot differently there, saying, well, we'll get into that in just a second. But Guilbeault here is saying it's deplorable that the U.S. is leaving the Paris Climate Accord. I've got some thoughts here. What is the meaning of signing on to one of these agreements? What is the meaning of it? What's the point of doing it? So you can have arguments back and forth with people who either believe in climate change or don't believe in climate change. You can have all kinds of arguments there, and people do. Have you seen the internet? People certainly do. But let's take the position that, okay, we need to do something about this issue. Guilbeault says that we need to be a part of this climate agreement, but what does that do? You sign your name on a piece of paper. You make these targets, set these targets on where you want to be by 2025. Now it is. By 2030, 2035, 2040, what are your targets? How are you going to hit them? What are the pledges that you're making? Okay. Pledges being made, sure. That could be helpful. But when you look at the data, ever since this signing of this multinational agreement, well, emissions have gone up. It hasn't made a meaningful difference in terms of preserving the environment and reducing emissions in any way. So being outraged that your neighbor nation is no longer signed on to this agreement doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because nobody's abiding by this accord anyways. Nobody's meaningfully hitting these targets, even Canada. We talk and we walk like we are some country that is the most serious on tackling climate change. We talk a big talk, but we don't walk a big walk. Well, we certainly spend like we're walking that walk, but when it comes to the results, and this is a theme over the past number of years in Canada, even if you spend a lot of money on something, it doesn't mean that you're solving the problem. Announcing that you're spending billions of dollars towards something doesn't mean anything when on the flip side, on the back end of it, you realize, all that money and nothing has really changed. Nothing has substantially happened. We haven't reduced our emissions because this is your end goal. This is the main thing that people are saying, we've got to do this. We haven't made progress there. And yet we are signed on to this agreement. So the idea that signing on to some agreement like this is something that is absolutely critical doesn't make a lot of sense to me when we see it simply hasn't worked up until this point. And we're seeing this also with the agreements that have been signed on by major investment funds. Something that was put together by Mark Carney, who's one of the Liberal leadership candidates. We're seeing all of the big banks, all of the big asset managers saying, hey, now it doesn't really make as much sense for us to be signed on to these. For what reason? Nothing's really changed here other than a new administration in the States, but they're all backing out of these agreements. So maybe it's not the agreement that is important. Maybe it's not having a global consensus about an issue. Maybe it's about actually asking the citizens of your country, what do you think that we should be doing? How should we be handling this issue rather than having prescriptive ideas passed down to you from on high? Maybe we could have actually done better if we took reasonable targets and if we actually went towards things that would not kill Canadians economically in pursuit of ideals, right? Because that is really what these kinds of agreements seem like they are to me. Like it seems so idealistic to me to believe that we can coordinate globally like this. Like even if you have people who sign on to the agreement, I think that it doesn't result in the outcome that you're actually looking for. Because in order to meaningfully make a difference on this issue, if that's something that you're concerned about doing, every single country in the world would need to make drastic economic concessions to hit these targets. We haven't done that. We've gone halfway, and the economic carnage has already been evident, and we haven't reduced our emissions at the same time. So why are we doing this again? And even for those countries who Canada has gone a lot of the way there, even for those countries that are most aggressive in pursuing these ideals, most aggressive in sacrificing economic growth in pursuit of these ideals, even those countries, are they really making a difference when it comes to their goals? Because the problem is that when one country makes those concessions, another country doesn't and reaps the benefit, right? We live in one big world with one amount of demand for energy. A global business community we see now with people hopping around between where their businesses are set up and where they are not set up. So when one country tries to be a moral good, a good example, well, what really ends up happening is that someone else takes their place. This is a theme we're going to get to a lot more in later in this episode. And now there's the argument here that, okay, we need to hit these targets because it's going to be more expensive in the long run. We're going to see more fires, more tornadoes, all of these issues are going to happen more and more if we don't take action right now. So it's going to be more expensive if we don't do something now, because 150 years in the future, we're going to have big problems that are going to be even more expensive than the costs that we would pay today. You've heard this argument before. You've heard it over and over again. It's all that people say. That could be true. It could be more expensive in the long run. But then you start to think, what is the human cost of all of that? How are you going to convince people that it makes sense to make these big concessions right now to serve something that is 100, 150 years down the line? Like, look at this like from an example. If you're a parent of a child and you're being asked to sacrifice financially, whether this is literal or if this is abstract, right? I'm looking at this on a country level, right? But for this example, a mother and a child, well, maybe would be less expensive for me to look out for the interests of our family 150 years from now. But am I really going to sacrifice the well-being of my child right now who is struggling to serve the interests of my great-great-grandchild? Does that make sense? I think some people will have different answers to that. In my eyes, you look out for what you know is true now. You look out for your immediate future, right? And if that's not on good footing, then how can you be asked to plan farther ahead? It's like somebody who's living check to check, right? Paycheck to paycheck. Like I do on these episodes, I constantly say you should be saving as much as you can, investing as much as you can, because when eventually our currency is devalued, well, those are the types of investments that will retain their value. I say this all the time, but that kind of language kind of falls on deaf ears for a lot of people, admittedly, even if it is the reality. Because, hey, I got to look out for me and mine today. I can't be thinking too much about the future. I think you should in the sense of investing, but it's that same sort of conversation, you know, like how much are we willing to sacrifice now to benefit an uncertain future? An uncertain future. We don't know what the world's going to look like in 50 to 100 years. So how much sacrifice can you eke out of people right now when the world is so uncertain, as we all know? So it seems idealistic to me, not only because once one country sort of steps up, the other one will take its place, but also because you'd be asking the citizens of the world, and as well as the countries of the world, to make these sacrifices over the long term. So obviously it's a bigger discussion here, but when it comes to Guilbeault and being absolutely pissed off, well, you can decide whether or not that actually makes a lot of sense to say, because these agreements do seem very symbolic to me, rather than being anything that actually results in results. That's a good way to say it. But now, this is the second executive order. I want to talk about this a little bit. He announced that the U.S. would be withdrawing from the World Health Organization. This is a sort of section of the United Nations organization that shares data and puts out different recommendations about how we should be handling various different health issues. Not a bad idea to have an organization like this, especially when it comes to sharing data, sharing information about what's going on in the world, so that individual countries can make their own minds up about how to handle various different things, so that individuals can make their mind up for themselves based on data that is more widely available. I think that that's a good thing. Having data. But there are some problems here as well. For sure. Because we've got the data, that's a good thing, but there's also international recommendations made by a centralized body, right? We've got a global organization that will impart various recommendations upon different countries on how they should and how they shouldn't handle different things. Now, I think we should be handling things on a far more national level, a level where independent countries can make their own minds up for themselves rather than having ideas handed on down from on high. This is the theme on the show. I don't think I'm the only one that is mistrusting of global organizations, because organizations are people. People are corruptible. People can make mistakes. And the same is true for organizations, because they are nothing but organizations of people, right? So these internal recommendations are used as fodder for individuals in each individual country to make their own argument that we should be going this way because of this recommendation, without sort of testing those recommendations for any kind of validity or making sure that they make sense, right? Push that aside. The main benefit of organizations like this, in my mind, is the sharing of data so that you can be more prepared and so that you can know how to handle things in your own country. Now, that benefit quickly dissolves, as we saw during the pandemic, because the benefits of data sharing, that clearly didn't help very much in that situation. There are widespread alleged reports of China intentionally misleading the World Health Organization, giving them false data, not reporting what was going on there early on in the early days of the pandemic. And that served the interests of an individual nation that used an organization to pursue their own individual goals. Of course, you don't want to be known as a country that is starting a worldwide pandemic. But if they know this is going to come out, then maybe let's delay that for a moment. If we know we're going to be needing some specific supplies to help our population, if this is truly a worldwide thing that's going to happen, well, then maybe let's report that a couple months later so that we can stockpile everything, take everything from the global markets, maybe flip them, or at the very least just have these things first, right? So I don't know if this is the right decision, withdrawing fully from this organization, but what's interesting to me is what it says about the way the world is going. Something that I tend to align with is a mistrust of institutions. Maybe my brain has been broken. Maybe my brain's been broken and I'm not making any sense with what I'm saying, but it seems like there's a lot of people and organizations out there that are saying, We know what is right for you. We know what is best for you, be it you as an individual or you as a country. We know what is best. Don't question us. We're smarter than you. We'll tell you what's right and we'll tell you what's wrong. I've got a problem with that. Do you? Let me know in the comments what you think of all that. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We've got videos like this, long form podcast style, hour plus long, but also shorter form content and 10, 15 minutes, updating mostly on financial topics that are going to impact you and Canadians. Clicking the subscribe button is free, doesn't cost you a dime, doesn't sign you up for anything. The only thing it does is help the channel. So I appreciate you doing that. We've got to move on though. I've got to down a little bit of water, but we've got to move on. We got to talk tariffs and the response to tariffs and a little bit of bullying that's going on here. Not between America and Canada, but between Canada and Canada. Have you seen this? I found it interesting because Canada, of course, is talking about these tariffs, the 25% tariffs on all imports or into the States from Canada, right? That could be passed on to consumers, right? Could encourage more American manufacturing. That's the idea of tariffs. Make it more expensive to use Canadian goods in America. That's the idea here. And of course, all of the talks about, okay, well, we're going to do a dollar for dollar response here. We're going to hit you just as hard. This is the response, right? Also, some updates from the past 24 hours. Lack of clarity about when this is going to happen, if it will ever happen. It seems like there's a pause on it. We don't know if it'll be end of February, start of February, even later. It's all up in the air. There was a good comment about how to handle the statements that come from Trump. And I think it's take him seriously, but not literally, right? I think that there's a lot that's just said. This is a guy that talks off the cuff very frequently, isn't always on a teleprompter. So in terms of intentions, you can kind of see the direction that he's going. But in terms of specifics, I think you got to wait till you see something on paper. We don't know when. But this is not even the most interesting thing that's going on here because there's some drama regarding the response to this. How should we respond? Canada is saying, well, hey, we're going to hit you where it hurts, right? Energy. We're going to put tariffs on all Canadian goods. That means oil. That means critical minerals that you may want, especially these days. Everything's on the table here. That is what the Prime Minister of Canada, as well as most of the other premiers in Canada, are pushing right now. But there's one odd duck here. One dissenter. Someone who disagrees with the group. And that's Danielle Smith. Lots of talk about Danielle Smith. Lots of people are very frustrated about this because she doesn't believe that we should just be putting a 25% tariff on the oil that America imports, right? Or charging it. She doesn't think that that's the kind of action that should be taken because she's looking at things a little bit differently than the rest of the country. The rest of the country says, hey, our individual provinces, oil isn't really our big sector here. So we're willing to sacrifice it to make a point here as a negotiation tactic. Now, Danielle, she says, well, no, I'm not going to let you on a national level decide what's best for me and the people that live in Alberta. And you can see both sides to this because when it comes to a negotiation, everything should be on the table, right? You don't want to say, we're not going to do this because you want to use that as a poker chip. You want to use that as a little bit of leverage. We could do this, even if you're never really intending on doing it. So as a negotiation tactic, not great that Danielle Smith is saying this. But you can understand also where she's coming from. A province that has constantly been told time and time again that it is the lone wolf. It is the odd one out. It is the one that has an industry in it that is evil, is something that should not be developed. We talked about this last time on the show. Seems a little bit hypocritical when now this industry is being used for leverage in negotiations, while for years it hasn't been developed because of this virtue signaling that's been going on. But you can understand where she's coming from. It feels like almost like the feds and the individual provinces are all ganging up on Alberta, saying, well, we'll be the ones that decide how your provincial industry is handled in regards to these negotiations. You can see both sides here, but I think a lot of the people who are saying, okay, this is one person who's kissing the ring of Trump because they don't want to put oil tariffs on the table. Is she serving the interests of Americans? That's what the feds in the other provinces would say, that you're not putting Canada first. But is it most important to put Canada first as a premier, or is it most important to put your province that you are the premier of first? Because certainly it serves the economic interests of Albertans to not have this happen, right? Could incredibly slow down that sector, that industry. So interesting there. Now, of course, the real goal here would be, by anyone who's sane, is to avoid these types of tariffs. Now, Trump has said a number of things about why these tariffs are being put in place. A lot of talk about the border, fentanyl coming across the border, impacting America. Now, in a press conference today, Trudeau came out and said, hey, we're handling that. We've already handled that. We've committed to $1 billion in spending to shore up our southern border. We want to make sure that's strong, make our border great again. Maybe you talk to him in those words. $1 billion spent, so why are the tariffs still apparently coming? Now, we've talked about this earlier, but $1 spent does not always result in $1 worth of results. We saw this with the climate stuff we were talking about, but also housing in Canada. How many hundreds of billions of dollars to support new housing starts have we seen that haven't actually resulted in new housing starts, at least not to the scale that we would hope. So $1 spent is not always $1 worth of results. So saying we're going to spend $1 billion, you'll see how. I could understand how that wouldn't be quite enough. But when it comes to fentanyl and drug trafficking over the border, I would agree that it's probably not happening to the extent that Trump would like people to think it is. But there is something that's going on in Canada, allegedly. I got to say that so I don't get sued. Allegedly, that is a bigger part of that whole problem. International crime organizations using Canada as a hub to operate. We've seen a lot of reporting on this about what's been going on in Vancouver, all the way out into the eastern provinces, and a lot in Ontario as well, where even if it's not the actual drugs that are being trafficked across the border there, Canada seems very, very susceptible to international crime organizations using it as a hub for various activities, most consequential of which is financial, as a financial hub for laundering the money, laundering the proceeds of the sale of these illegal drugs. By a lot of reporting, you can look into some of Sam Cooper's reporting on this, read the book Willful Blindness. There are some allegations here that the only reason a lot of these crime organizations can operate is because they are able to then wash that money and use it after the fact, right? Whether it's through casinos or whether it's through currency conversion fronts. These are all different ways that these international crime organizations can take these cash transactions of selling these kinds of products and wash them and use them for other means. So when it comes to addressing Canada's role in the fentanyl crisis, which is not just happening in America, is a concern of Canada as well. I think it's not just the border that we need to be looking at, but also the network of financial crime that by many accounts is going on in Canada, as well as the ports on Canada, especially Canada's west coast. Maybe there needs to be better regulation there. We've seen all of the stolen cars. This has been a story, at least in Ontario and in the Greater Toronto area where I'm from, but cars being stolen, and then you find out that they've been sold and are in Africa somewhere. By all accounts, these are making their way to these port towns, these port areas on the west coast, and making their way worldwide. Maybe there needs to be a little bit more regulation on what is actually happening in these ports, who owns these corporations that are operating here, and how can we make sure that they're not contributing to these kinds of issues. So I can understand why some of the tariffs are coming, because even if you choose to spend $1 billion at the border, will that solve the problem? We've got to wait and see. We do. And we've talked about this on a previous episode, but I've always got to take a second to say, hey, there's the point of view that I brought up previously now being shared on a more broad level, because believe it or not everybody watches these all the time, especially the long form stuff. I appreciate you watching if you are. But we've got a conversation here between Vasi Kapelos and Jagmeet Singh. One that I found really, really interesting, because she makes the exact point that I was making on these tariffs, that we are in a very vulnerable spot in Canada, largely because of the radical environmental movement saying, hey, we've got to be a martyr here. We've got to be a good example for the world. Even if we're not actually reducing our emissions, we've got to clamp down on our energy sector. We've got to make sure we don't build pipelines that would allow us access to sell our energy products to anyone other than the US. Because we have no other trading partners, or very few other trading partners when it comes to these types of products, well, America has a chokehold on us. And, well, the conversation that is had here, I found very, very interesting. Listen to this. This is exactly what I'm talking about.
At some instances has been, and I certainly do understand the criticism that you're levying, but it has been like, we're so reliant on sending our stuff to the U.S., including oil, because there has not been any sort of will at the level of the federal government for building pipelines or other ways to get this product to other markets. I mean, your party, and you specifically, Mr. Singh, have opposed the building of pipelines, including TMX, and spent the federal government spending money on that at every step of the way. Do you not, is there not some culpability there in the fact that we are so vulnerable as an export market when it comes to our energy to just the U.S.?
There's no doubt that diversification is important. We need to be able to produce more in our own country. We need to refine more in our own country. The fact that we have got such an incredible wealth of critical minerals, but we're not actually building the batteries in our country. We're not actually refining those products. With our timber as well, we log, but we don't refine or add value to the raw goods that we produce in our country. So that's serious. That's a serious concern that we have. The Liberals and Conservatives have been in power since the beginning of this country, and they've certainly failed on that front to develop a more developed economy, an economy that adds value to the raw resources that we have.
Notice how throughout this answer, there's no comment on the actual topic at hand, and that is oil. Being able to get oil to the various different ports that we were just talking about, and actually be able to sell that to other countries. Now, he talks about the refining of different commodities, right? The refining of natural resources. Be that lumber, critical minerals, like uranium, all of these things that seem to be crucial to the economy. Not processing that in Canada. And he says, yeah, that's true. But when it comes time to talk about oil, because the NDP's kind of backed themselves into this corner that we can't say anything positive about this sector, well, it kind of makes them have to talk around this point.
But Mr. Singh, I'm asking you about oil, right? You have been opposed to pipelines that would allow for Canada to export its oil to other places other than the United States. Was that a mistake?
I mean, I don't think that's relevant right now to the question of tariffs being imposed on Canada, and in response to that, us being willing to do whatever is necessary. And I disagree with Daniel Smith, who's prematurely pulling back a potential tool. I think in negotiating, you need to have all your tools ready to go, and you escalate them as necessary. We need to respond if there are tariffs with tariffs in kind. We also need to make it clear, I think, to the workers that might be impacted that we will have their back, that we will support them. So that's my focus.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, the relevancy is more in the medium to long term, right? In oil is one aspect of it, but essentially we're in a place where 4 years after we thought there wouldn't be another Donald Trump, there is one, and we're incredibly vulnerable to the prospect of any tariffs because of our reliance on the U.S. as an export market. And I was just asking about whether or not oil should only go there, or if if it's being, short-sighted to essentially oppose getting oil to other places so that we're not so vulnerable.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't focus on just one product. I think in general, my response to that is in general, the previous governments, both conservative and liberal, have not built an economy in Canada where we do more than just take out raw materials out of the earth. We need to also refine products. We need to add value to products in our own country. We need to build more of the things that we need in Canada. That's clearly a fault of both liberals and conservatives who've been in power since the beginning of this country, that they've not built an economy that is more resilient and that is less vulnerable to the United States and someone like Donald Trump threatening tariffs.
He's backed into a corner here, right? Because he tries to pass off the blame. Quite a lot, saying, hey, this is an issue of the conservatives and the liberals because they didn't manage things properly. But the reason that these things weren't managed properly, certainly by the liberal government over the past 9 years, is because of the same types of ideologies, ones that sound good and are ideal, and if everyone stood by them, it would be great, and we'd all hold hands, and we'd be catching butterflies in the rainbows with people in Iran. All across the world, everybody joined as one global community, all happy and holding hands and being happy and wonderful. And isn't that just nice? It's very idealistic. And it's because of these idealistic views, in my eyes, that Canada isn't ready. And it's not just the people that are in power, but it's also the people keeping those people in power and their views. And even to this point, Singh can't say anything about the oil industry other than it is 100% bad. It is bad for Canada, right? He won't even allow himself to talk about the reality of the situation, not just ideals, not just in a perfect world ideas, right? And I think he's a large part of that. And in saying that I'm not a part of it, and saying that it was the fault of the previous government that I conveniently supported, it seems a little bit rich. But all that to say, I just had to go for a little bit of a quick victory lap there because it seems like that view that many people wouldn't talk about before, that we've talked about on this show, well, it's getting out there a little bit more. It's getting out there just a little bit more. But now let's focus on something a little more local, at least when it comes to national stuff. We've got this leadership race heating up. 3 major people in it right now. That's Mark Carney, it's Chrystia Freeland, it's Karina Gold. I remembered her name this time. Not a great sign for her prospects. That's the name that I forget, but I guess we'll see how that goes. But I'm only pulled to one of these candidates. Freeland, we know her. She's been around forever. I don't think that a lot of people are going to be convinced by the way that she talks. It's that same diminishing, or what's that word? It's that same way of being talked down to. That's the cadence, and that's all I can hear now. That's all I can hear now. It never feels like it's a friend that I'm talking to that's explaining their views on an issue. It's carefully crafted for a second grade reading level messages that are going out. And this is what we see. And I watched the whole launch press conference, and that's all it really was. trying to frame herself as the one that can take down Donald Trump, that can be the best negotiator because she did the new NAFTA, the USMCA agreement a number of years ago. But I'm not drawn to her. I'm not drawn to talking about her or analyzing her as much. I am drawn to Mark Carney, though. I've talked on the channel about some of my concerns there, but he makes a lot of good points. He identifies the issues very well. We've got some disagreements, though, and they're ones that are pretty hard to look past. Listen to this question, or actually this sort of statement made by him in his press conference over this past weekend, where he announced his plan to run to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. Listen in here, and notice that it might sound kind of familiar to a certain conservative politician in terms of the way he's talking about it.
Pour nous. But those good old times, my friends, are over. Our times are anything but ordinary. The system, it's not working as it should. And it's not working as it could. People are anxious. No wonder. Too many are falling behind. Too many young people can't afford a home. Too many people can't find a doctor. And then we're living through the two biggest technological revolutions since they split the atom. And our climate is changing in ways that threatens livelihoods from Fort Mac to Fort Smith. And then on top of that, as George just mentioned, in just 4 days, the United States will swear in Donald Trump as their 47th president.
So, okay, says the system is not working. The system is not working. The system is not working. This is what Mark Carney is saying. He says, okay, there are some big problems here. He's trying to frame himself as the economic right choice to pick for Canada because, well, a lot of people have been screwed. A lot of people have been screwed, and everybody knows it. Everybody feels it. He says himself, the system is not working. It's not working as it should. So he's good at identifying the issues. Young people can't afford homes. The price of everything just keeps going up. The wealth inequality just keeps on growing and growing and growing and growing. And he has some solutions for it. He says that, okay, there's been too much government spending, but not enough investment. We need to grow the economy so that we can then redistribute wealth and tax people and spread it out and make everyone equal. This is what he says. He says we can't redistribute what we don't have. This is what he says just after the clip that we just watched in the video. He kind of uses this to separate himself from Trudeau, saying, well, Trudeau's that same sort of thing we were just talking about in this episode, right? A dollar spent isn't necessarily a dollar result, right? There's got to be a better way to say that. There's got to channel Pierre Poilievre for those slogans, right? So he's separating himself from Trudeau, saying, well, he would just spend, he didn't invest in the right ways. I would be the one that would know the right ways to invest because I am Lord of the economy. We've got another clip here, and it's one that might sound a little bit hypocritical given the one that we just watched. Listen to this. I guess it would help if you could see it, wouldn't it? Boom.
No, it's not the time for lifelong politicians such as Pierre Poilievre.
That is loud. My bad. New studio. Who this?
Yeah.
Politicians with bad ideas. Naive and dangerous ideas. And I think the worst, his worst, is that Canada is broken. Canada is broken was one of Pierre Poilievre's many three-word slogans, and it couldn't be more dangerous. Now, in the UK, I saw firsthand what happened there after years of conservatives shouting that their country was broken. Conservatives don't run around saying Canada's broken because they want to fix it. They want a license to demolish and destroy, including many of the things on which we all and regular people depend. Because populists don't understand how the economy and our society actually works.
So, some big statements there from Carney. I think maybe you'll notice the sort of contradiction here, the one that stood out to me. I'll give you a second to guess. The first clip, what was the main thing that we were talking about there? It was, the system is not working in Canada. The system is not working for everyone. It's this nation is not working. The system in this nation is not working. You might even say that it's broken. And then in the second clip, he comes out and says, that is the most dangerous thing that you can possibly say. That's the most dangerous thing that you can say as a politician, is that Canada is broken. He says that because Poilievre says this, that it's dangerous and that he's actually hurting the country. So I don't know what to make of that when these two statements are minutes apart from each other in a speech. But it's not just this, like that's a side thing. Every politician is going to try to frame things their own ways. But he slams on populists and populism. He says Pierre Poilievre is a populist, and that's dangerous. They don't actually understand the economy. They don't understand how things work. I understand how things work. He doesn't, and you don't, but I do. And it leads me to a question that I've been thinking about for a while now. Why is populism a bad thing? It's been framed as this dirty, dirty word. Populists are dangerous. Populists are dangerous. They don't serve your interests. They're not the right people to lead countries. But why? I think the idea of populism is ideally or appealing to the population of people that you're serving. Ideally, or sharing things that sound good to the population of people that you're serving. Speaking in ways that they not only understand, but that resonates with them and reflects their lives and what they're seeing day to day. What's so bad about that? Is that something that is evil? To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense that this is used as such a whistle to say this person is this bad thing. They're a populist. If I'm the population of a country, I would certainly want my politician to be a populist. Somebody who appeals to the interests that I have. Because when you say that you are against your population or against populism, you're saying, well, that's inherently an argument that diminishes the capability of Canadian people to make up their own minds and to discern what is true and make judgments for themselves. It's inherently I know best, you should trust me kind of argument, right? To say populism is bad, at least in my understanding. Doesn't that make sense to you? By saying that people can't make up their own minds for themselves about whether or not a person is actually speaking to what they want and to their interests and putting out ideas and plans that would serve them. Calling that a bad thing because Canadians can't recognize what is actually good for them, that just seems so infantilizing. It seems like you got to listen to me. I'm daddy government. I'm going to lay down the law. You're going to do what I say because I'm the one that has the PhD. I'm the one that has worked at every kind of financial institution that you possibly can. Investment banks, central banks. I know best. I know what is best for you. And you got to listen to me. I don't trust you to make up your own mind about the world you're living in. You've got to trust the experts. You've got to trust the people that know best for you. And this is a frustrating thing, I think, for a lot of people to hear. We're grown men, we're grown women. And having government officials say time and time and time and time again, well, actually, they just don't understand what is real. That's a frustrating thing to hear. But I don't think that the argument is necessarily against populists, right? The argument here, I think, is about institutionalists, a category that I would firmly put Carney in. I'm not sure if this is a way that people typically talk about this. Carney says the system isn't working, but simultaneously says we need to trust our institutions. These institutions like the central banks, these institutions like we were talking about, the World Health Organization, International Monetary Fund, Bank of International Settlements, World Economic Forum. You say that and everyone thinks you're a conspiracy theorist, but these are global organizations that purport to know best and what should be done in any given situation, and everybody must trust these organizations. Believing in all of that, I think, makes you an institutionalist. Maybe that's a good thing. Carney certainly thinks so. Maybe that's a good thing and it actually is beneficial for the general population. Maybe so. Maybe so. It certainly makes people easier to govern if you have a totally trusting population that just inherently trusts that you and the institutions that you look to will do the right thing at all times. I think that's what institutionalists think. But the question is, you agree, yes, the system isn't working or Canada is broken. These are kind of two things said by two different political candidates. They kind of mean the same thing. The question is, how are you hoping to fix it? Carney says populists say, just tear it down, but there's no solutions behind it. I'd argue more so that an institutionalist would say, here is the system, let's tweak around the margins. Let's make some minor change, and that minor change is now all of a sudden going to fix the fact that the system isn't working for average people. And that's a fair argument. Maybe there is some hidden lever, hidden knob. Definitely Carney would know where the knobs and the levers are. Maybe there is some small tool, some small tweak that will magically make the entire system work for average people and not just the incredibly wealthy. I'm not so convinced that that's the case, and that there is some marginal tweak that you can make that will not only make people regain trust in these institutions, but will also make these institutions serve the people that they're saying that they're serving. Versus the other side of things, where Carney's right, a lot of populists will say, tear it down and rebuild. It's a question, do you tweak the system that exists, or do you tear it down and then rebuild something from the ground up that maybe will serve people better? The nihilist in me, the black pillar, the person who is very cynical in my mind, this is one of my many personalities, they say, the various people in my head, that side of me says, well, okay, even if you burn it all down, you build something back up, it's just going to be a similar system serving a different group of people. The system today serves giant corporations, wealthy consultants, politicians that jump from company to company to political role, to consultant role, to somebody sitting on some obscure panel of the UN. It's a global organization of the elite, right? These people that hop from place to place. Am I entirely convinced that burning that system down and building up a new one would actually work out better for the non-elite? I'm not totally convinced. If you burn down these institutions, you don't believe in central banking anymore. You don't believe in the organizations that monitor and control that type of stuff. I'm not entirely convinced that you wouldn't build another system that's similar, but just is serving a different group of people. That's the cynic in me. I hope not. But that's part of the conversation here. Are you an institutionalist, or are you, I guess, a populist? Institutionalist, somebody that thinks you can make these small tweaks and that will actually make a big difference, or you got to burn it down to build it back up. We got to start fresh, baby. These are the two ideas. I don't know what's right. But that's what Carney sounds like to me. That's what Carney sounds like to me. And that's what Poilievre sounds like to me. And I don't know. Because if the world is going to work in the same way that it always has, if the system's going to keep on ticking and keep on rolling in the same way, the world order is going to stay in the way it is, the same institutions will make the decisions, well, then Carney could be an okay operator at that. He could be an okay person to have behind the wheel because he knows how that system works. Now, is that system good? Does it serve you? That's another question. But we've got to move on from this. We only got a little bit left in terms of time here for the show. I've got a warning for you. A warning about some hypocritical views that I've seen a lot online. You might have seen these too. You probably have. Especially around the inauguration that happened and the election that happened and the extreme heavy involvement of none other than Rocket Man Elon Musk. People being appalled by Elon Musk and just how involved he got in this election has raised a lot of eyebrows. A lot of people aren't too fond of him as a result. Now I've got to ask you, if you're one of those people that are very frustrated by his involvement, let's be realists here. Let's see the way that the world has been working and the way it is working right now. Yeah, there's a lot of money in politics. And if you have a lot of money, you can have a lot of sway in politics. Whether you're a wealthy individual, a wealthy corporation, an organization of wealthy corporations, a lot of politicians are just serving those types. And you can point to the Trump inauguration with all of the billionaire tech founders in the front row. It's concerning, right? For a lot of people, should they have that much sway. But I would warn you against only taking issue with that type of thing when the billionaires are saying something that you don't agree with, right? If you haven't been commenting all along about how corporations are influencing politics and how billionaires are influencing politics, if you haven't been complaining all along, then why are you complaining now? Because it seems like a lot of people are complaining only now that these CEOs and founders like Elon Musk are saying something that you don't politically agree with. It shouldn't be that I don't like these billionaires interfering in politics only when they don't align with me politically. No. I think that you should be against that kind of money being in politics and impacting the average day-to-day life of average citizens around the world. You should be against that all the goddamn time. That's not a good thing to have happening. But it seems like a lot of people are only upset about it now that you've got someone in there, in Elon Musk, that is saying things that they don't agree with. Because corporations have been controlling it the whole time. It's just that those corporations were either quiet about it, they weren't saying as much, weren't being as loud, weren't getting up on stage. That's a valid criticism of Musk. Not the most subtle about it. That's probably what his billionaire friends are saying. Like, why are you being so loud, my guy? Don't you know that we're supposed to grease the wheels of the world underneath the table? Poor form, poor form. But if you're only upset about this when it's happening, like if you haven't commented on the corporations who have been doing the same thing while saying political things that you agree with, if you weren't concerned about that, even though they were agreeing with you, then I don't think you have a right to be concerned about it now. I don't think you have a right to be concerned about it now, and it seems hypocritical to me to say I only dislike billionaires in politics when they don't serve my personal political interests. That seems a little bit rich to me. So just a warning that I'm seeing a lot of that. Have you seen that too? Let me know. All this talk, though, we've got this election coming in Canada. We're expecting to see it in March, or at least that's what we were told, because we're supposed to think that Jagmeet Singh is going to trigger an election by voting against the Liberals. Now, we've got confirmation of that. I don't know if I trust it, though. Here's another clip. Let me know what you think about this. Hopefully I don't blast your eardrums here.
Because I'm sure you're aware, all the candidates are talking about maybe there won't be an election as soon as the spring. Maybe they can work out another arrangement with your party, like people behind the scenes. I wanted to ask you quite bluntly, you had said prior to Christmas that no matter what, at the earliest possible availability, that you would vote to bring the government down, that you would offer a vote of no confidence in the government. Is that still the case? Do you plan on doing that no matter what the economic circumstances, what Trump is doing, all the extenuating things?
Yeah, I've been really clear, and I remain clear, and I appreciate the opportunity to repeat it. We will be voting to bring down the government at the earliest opportunity. There will be an election and a choice where people they tell me they feel let down by the Liberals, so the choice will be between conservatives like Pierre Poilievre, who want to cut the things that people need and it's going to cost people a lot more, or New Democrats who want to lower your bills by making billionaires pay for once and bringing down the cost of living, building homes you can actually afford. That's going to be the next election, and we're ready for that.
Mr. Singh, I'll leave it on that note.
Okay. Do you trust it? Is that actually going to happen? Is that actually going to happen? Because in my mind, I don't trust it. I don't trust that Singh would vote against the Liberals at the first available opportunity. It seems like that's what he's saying. We'll vote down the Liberals. But will he vote in favor of a conservative motion that would result in a confidence vote? Or would he say, actually what we meant was that when we decide to put forward a confidence vote as the NDP, when we try to push forward a motion, then that's what I'm talking about. That's actually what I'm talking about. It's not at the earliest moment, like he's saying would serve individuals in Canada. I don't believe it. I don't believe that it's going to come at the earliest point here, because it doesn't serve the NDP's interests specifically. I think that they probably want political points for being the ones to take down the government with an NDP opposition motion. So I could see it being delayed and delayed and delayed further and further and further. Because we've seen a lot of performative stuff from this party and this guy, honestly. The ripping up of the agreement, the supply and confidence agreement between him and the Liberals, and then continuing to support for a number of months until it's convenient that now they can drop Trudeau as leader, do a whole election, and have that that Liberal leadership race lead directly into an election with all kinds of coverage at the perfect moment if you're doing a leadership swap. It seems like kind of working together a little bit. But I guess we'll see. This will be something that we'll find out sooner rather than later. Is March when we're expected to see this vote happen. So back when Parliament comes back. So we'll have to see. Do you think it's going to happen? I'm not fully convinced. But a lot going on here today. A lot. Those changes, those executive orders, the World Health Organization, the Paris agreements, dropping out of those two institutions, good or a bad idea. What have I missed here? What have I been totally wrong on? Let me know in the comments. Same with the tariffs and the response, the difference in opinion between Alberta and the rest of Canada. Hey, I've heard that before. It's happened a lot, almost probably just as much as the Quebec talks about being so different from the rest of Canada. So too does Alberta. What do you think of that? The leadership race, this idea of institutionalists versus globalists. Am I onto something there? Does that make sense to you? Let me know. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Super easy, super free. Just click the subscribe button. It doesn't sign you up for anything. It only helps out the channel. If you don't watch my videos, you're not going to see me even on your home feed. It's all algorithm anyway. So all that button does is just help out the channel, and you're probably not going to see me again anyway. So I appreciate you hitting that. if you haven't already done so. But that has been the Russ Matthews Show. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you next time. There's definitely going to be more to talk about, so I'll talk to you then.